welcome. I'm Richard Barrett. I'm a fellow at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. Thank you for giving this group an opportunity to present their research findings to you today. Just giving you a background on their research. The research was a group project as part of a part-time master's program. So these are all professionals, many of them working in the finance sector. This is a 9-month research project, so it's a non-trivial exercise. It has to focus on a theme relevant to sustainability leadership and has to include a review of existing knowledge on a topic, but also they have to undertake some primary data research themselves. This is a master's by research program, so that element is absolutely critical. The choice of the topic is critical too. It has to be a subject that's really relevant to the theme of sustainability leadership. And it was why this theme that's related to the climate emergency emerged as a really appropriate and timely addition to the knowledge on this subject. We're seeing a lot of regulatory innovation around disclosure and climate change. The TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, is now gaining ground. And financial institutions in particular are beginning to engage with it. In fact, in our home country, the UK, the government's already decided to make disclosure mandatory. So how boards in particular think about climate risk and opportunity is critical to that, because governance is one of the key elements of TCFD reporting, and clearly the tone of a company towards a particular issue starts at the top, which is the board. So after some discussion, this group decided to focus on that particular subject. I hope you enjoy their findings. So over to you, Beata.
Thanks very much, Richard, for that introduction. And thank you very much for your support throughout the research process. I think we all benefited massively from that. My name is Beate Born. I'm head strategic projects at UBS in Zurich. I've got about 15 years of experience in financial services and consulting, similar to my fellow research team that you will hear from today as well. When we started our sustainability journey at Cambridge as the finance group of the cohort, so we discussed what we wanted to research, and it had to add value to a real world problem in financial services somehow. That was important to us. And we kept coming back to the notion that it all starts at the top of the organization. So it does start at board level. And we wanted to find out what makes a board tick and how ESG topics are best brought up on board level, how they're best integrated. So for the next 20 minutes, we'll share some highlights about what board characteristics are driving the climate change response of firms in the finance sector, which was also the title of our topic, of our paper. Before handing over to Sam for board structure, I'll tell you a little bit about the research process that we went through. To start with, we defined that we needed to figure out if there's a blueprint for a board. So we wanted to have that roster that we can go by, that structure. And in general, we looked at board structure, board processes, and board characteristics that could potentially guarantee a decent climate change response of the organization. We set an industry focus on financial services and a geographical focus on Australia, Europe, and the UK. While the geographical focus was mainly a convenience choice, the industry choice was a conscious decision. Yes, we all work in finance, but we also see it as a major lever that can be utilized to support the ESG paradigm shift. There's recently been a lot of focus on financial services to support climate change mitigation by ensuring that especially private sector assets are allocated into sustainable investments. For example, this is clearly laid out in the EU Commission Action Plan on Finance Sustainable Growth, and is also reflected in the regulations that Richard mentioned earlier. So between the financial services industry being a crucial starting point and the board level reflecting an influential lever for change, we figured that more insight into what makes the board tick would certainly add value to the community. So how do we do it? We picked up where the existing literature left off, because this is an academic research. So we looked at board characteristics, and those are defined as board structure, so committees, independence of the board, CEO, duality, size, tiering, and so on. Secondly, board process, That means the frequency of the meetings, committee interaction, and communication to the outside. And then lastly, board diversity, which does include gender, age, and cultural background, and so on. But that topic of diversity opened up a whole new chapter for us to consider. The mindset of the board members themselves, the collective mindset of the board, and the question around the existence of a sustainability mindset on that board. So that was essentially the big piece, and we'll hear from Claire about that. We collected data via semi-structured interviews as well as an online survey, and we got data from 50 different firms in the financial services and consulting industry. So now I'll hand over to Sam, who is going to kick us off with a bit of information around board structure and also the survey results, and we'll then go on to David and Claire with the rest of the findings. Over to you, Sam.
Thanks, Beata. And I'm Sam Anthony. I work as an analyst for an asset manager called 91, and I particularly focus on our climate strategy. So spend a lot of time on this sort of thing. So from a structure perspective, we looked, as Beata said, we looked at committees, independence of directors, tiering, size as well. And from the literature, the only sort of clear relationship we could find was there was a relationship between CEO duality, splitting the chairman and CEO role, and a positive sort of climate response from that company. And we mainly investigated the structure component through a survey because there's definitive aspects to it. So we wanted a clear sort of answer from the people we were speaking to. And in that survey, it was, again, pretty inconclusive, similar to the literature. And there was even some sort of, there was a lack of consensus generally, and people even expressed frustration at not having the correct answer. So it's very clear in that survey that people just didn't have know how to think about it, or there was no agreement as well. And that sort of component flowed through into the interviews as well. When we spoke about structure in those, again, there just seemed to be a lack of consensus across the people we spoke to. So really the bottom line from structure is that there is no blueprint, there is no consensus, there is no expectation of how to address climate from a board perspective. And with that, I'll pass over to David.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, I'm David Jones. I'm a chartered accountant and spent the first part of my career in the City of London working in banking and insurance. And I'm currently working on a startup seeking to fund regenerative agriculture in the United Kingdom. So we also looked at processes, and the literature on the topic emphasised the fiduciary duty of boards to oversee long-term prospects and the performance of the firm, including sustainability and climate risk. And to do this by setting strategy in particular, and by setting the tone for the organisation and holding management accountable, including reporting. But the literature was quite conclusive that there is no clarity on how a board should go about this, specifically regarding climate and climate risk. In the survey and the interviews that were conducted, there was strong support for an executive working hand in hand on developing climate strategy, but there was also a perceived shortfall on how boards and executives should go about this and what processes they should follow. Boards tend not to take the initiative. We identified that this is partly because they had relatively weak knowledge and access to information. The executive tend to advise the board on matters such as TCFD reporting frameworks, for example. And one board member of a global bank noted that neither the audit nor the risk committee ever discussed climate risks. Conversely, there was an exception where the chair also headed the sustainability committee, demonstrating strong leadership in the topic. And there were a number of respondents in the survey and in one-to-one interviews, which clearly identified that the issue pivoted around the attitude and beliefs and purpose of the chair of the board in driving the processes that sat below the entire organization. So this again, rather as Sam suggested, drove us to thinking, well, this is about the actions and beliefs of the individuals that are driving the processes of the organizations. And I'll hand over to Claire to say a few more words about that.
Thanks, David. My name is Claire Nixon-Havens. Like Beata, I've been in financial services industry for about 15 years. I started off as a bank analyst at UBS and currently, most recently, been working at the Australian Sustainable Finance Initiative here in Sydney. David brings up a very good point about the role of the chair and the importance of their leadership in climate response. And much of the literature about what drives board performance and also climate disclosures is based on observational attributes such as gender and nationality. Where our paper was a bit different was that it interviewed directors directly and asked them what they thought was important. And this actually addresses sort of an area of scarce academic literature, according to Stiles in 2001, who said there isn't really very much research at all from the perspective of directors. And if you want to analyze bank boards or boards of financial services companies, or in fact, probably any board, you really need to be inside that board and really be able to see it from the ground. So one of the findings from our interviews was that gender diversity could help increase diversity of thinking, which is good, obviously, to avoid groupthink. And other forms of diversity were also thought to be important by the directors, such as age. And there were some comments about, the need to get rid of dead wood from boards and bring in some fresh blood. And of course, why this diversity was felt to be important was not so much the fact that one gender may be better or worse than another. It was really the diversity of thinking and having to have people who think differently on boards to increase the discussion. Several different types of mindset were viewed as important by the directors that we interviewed. So stewardship mindset was discussed, sustainability mindset, a national and international mindset, and also positive mindsets. And these were all these types of mindset were all mentioned as important in relation to taking up the opportunities as well as dealing with the risks of climate change. So it's important to understand that climate response does include both opportunities from the transition to a low carbon economy as well as dealing with the risks. And mindset of the chair was viewed as especially key, as David intimated. But even if you are the chairman of one of these financial institutions, unless you have the backing of at least one other director, it's extraordinarily difficult to progress the conversation. One other finding that we discovered was that even if you have a chair who is a believer, they have to temper how strident they are. They have to sort of lead the rest of the board along very gently and slowly, so as not to get other directors digging in their heels. And one chair of a financial institution said, "I'm like a mole chipping away at their insecurities," meaning having to sort of make the bring home to the other directors on the board just how important this issue is by sort of almost frightening them to get them on board. Other directors said yes, other chairs said you have to tread carefully, otherwise other directors will dig in their heels and they won't want to listen to it. So another finding we noted was that the chair's personality is really important. So even if they are a believer, it can, how they respond to others on the board is really important. And one director of a financial services organization in Australia mentioned that even though the chair was a climate change believer, they had brought in an expert to sit on the board as a climate expert. They were described as a control freak who was threatened by the climate expert that they brought on the board. And so progress was really stalled by that. Another director mentioned that it doesn't really matter what we think as long as we understand what the chair wants us to achieve, and it's the chair who dictates what's on the agenda. So this really reinforces again the importance of the chair's personality and the chair's beliefs. So just a quick recap, mindset of board was found partially in the literature as something important, but it was really something that the directors that we interviewed felt was absolutely vital in terms of the climate response. So with that, I'll just hand over to Beata again.
Yes, thank you very much, David, Sam, and Claire, for these interesting elaborations. And thanks everybody in the audience for tuning into our session today. It's fantastic to see that there's such an interest in this topic of board governance and ESG, which is obviously something that's very close to our hearts as well. And there's been a lot of movement in the industry as well. There's been a recent article in January of this year in the Harvard Business Review. And we've also been approached for publications and webinars. We've recently given a webinar to the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investments. Yes, in general, we hope you have enjoyed this session. And if you take one thing from the last 20 minutes, it's that active mindset is one of the most defining factors when it comes to boards and climate change performance. If you've got any questions, our contact info is in the bios. Reach out to us. We're always happy to hear from you. And thank you very much. Have a good rest of the conference. Where's the stop?